The mental demolition method of Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer didn't try to win arguments by being louder. He didn't rely on charm, charisma, or groupthink. He fought with silence, observation, and ruthless logic. While most philosophers of his time were busy constructing elaborate theories, Schopenhauer was doing something far more dangerous. He was tearing them apart. Not out of malice, but out of clarity. He believed that truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to survive close scrutiny. And so he trained his mind like a precision weapon designed not to create but to destroy weak logic wherever it dared to hide. In his now iconic work, The Art of Being Right, Schopenhauer laid out a step-by-step system for mental combat. First, identify the core premise of your opponent's argument. Then trace its logical consequences until you find a contradiction. Finally, expose that contradiction in a way that collapses the entire structure. It wasn't debate, it was demolition. His technique was so sharp that contemporaries described it as intellectually devastating. He didn't need volume, he needed timing, clarity, and the nerve to go straight for the weak spot. But this wasn't just talent. It was built through relentless training. Schopenhauer spent hours a day studying philosophical texts, not to agree with them, but to test them. He would pull at threads of logic until entire frameworks unraveled in his hands. He didn't fear complexity. He hunted it because he knew that the more complicated an idea became, the more likely it was to hide an error at its core. And when he found it, he struck. There was no hesitation, no ego, just surgical precision. Schopenhauer didn't try to look smart, he simply refused to be fooled. What made his approach even more terrifying was its emotional detachment. He didn't argue to win approval or applause. He argued to reveal truth, or more often the lack of it. When others got caught in rhetorical traps or emotional pleas, Schopenhauer stayed cold. He waited. He listened. And then he dismantled. His mind operated like a demolition crew trained to find the weakest pillar in a building and bring it crashing down with a single touch. Imagine being in a conversation with someone who isn't rattled, who doesn't flinch, who listens deeply not to respond but to locate your logical blind spots. That was the psychological power of Schopenhauer. People feared debating him not because he was aggressive, but because he was surgical. He didn't overpower. He unraveled, quietly, precisely, fatally. In a world where people seek to be heard, Schopenhauer mastered the art of cutting through noise with nothing but thought. His legacy teaches us that intellectual strength isn't about dominating others. It's about being able to see clearly, think critically, and refuse to be seduced by superficial logic. His mind was a scalpel in a room full of hammers, and once he found the contradiction hiding beneath your confidence, there was nothing left to do but watch your argument collapse under its own weight. That's not conversation. That's war fought with silence and sharpened by truth. Nietzsche's Dance with Chaos, The Power of Contradiction. Friedrich Nietzsche didn't fear contradiction. He cultivated it like fire in his hands. Where most thinkers sought clarity through consistency, Nietzsche found freedom through tension. He believed that true strength of mind isn't found in certainty, but in the ability to hold multiple conflicting truths without falling apart. That's why his writing feels like a battlefield, not between good and evil, but between all the hidden selves inside us. While the world praised order, Nietzsche whispered something radical. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. This wasn't poetic flair. It was cognitive method. Nietzsche trained his mind not to land on answers, but to live inside the paradox. For every moral, he explored its opposite. For every value, he unearthed the hypocrisy beneath it. He didn't believe in universal truths, he believed in psychological depth. In his notebooks, he challenged himself with a brutal discipline: take any idea and force your mind to see it from 3 completely contradictory angles. Then build a strong argument for each. Not to trick others, but to immunize himself from ideological capture. He saw what most miss, that people become mentally fragile not because they're weak, but because they cling to one perspective too tightly. The moment that viewpoint cracks, their world shatters. Nietzsche refused to live like that. Instead, he built a mind that couldn't be cornered. If you attacked his pessimism, he'd defend it with optimism. If you called him a nihilist, he'd respond with a theology of personal meaning. He played every role because he was none of them. And this wasn't just intellectual gymnastics. It was emotional warfare. Nietzsche lived with migraines so intense they blinded him for days. He was alone, misunderstood, and often physically broken. Yet during these moments of pain, he produced his most powerful work. Not despite the suffering, but because of it. He used pain like pressure on the mind, forging new pathways, deeper insights, raw clarity. He called it philosophizing with a hammer. Not to build, but to shatter illusions. There is something terrifyingly liberating in that. Imagine embracing discomfort, contradiction, and chaos not as enemies, but as tools of transformation. Nietzsche showed us that greatness isn't about being right. It's about being unshakable. The kind of mind he cultivated doesn't rely on affirmation from the world. It's immune to labels. It can argue both sides, stand in the fire, and come out sharper. In an age where everyone rushes to pick a side, Nietzsche reminds us that the strongest mind is the one that plays in the middle, that sits in the storm and listens to every voice, even the ugly ones, without needing to silence them. It's not balance. It's not neutrality. It's a higher kind of war, one waged inside the soul, where contradiction is not a weakness, but a form of intellectual freedom. Nietzsche didn't want to win debates. He wanted to awaken minds. And in the chaos he embraced, he discovered a power no single belief could ever hold. Machiavelli's silent weapon, the science of human weakness. Niccolò Machiavelli didn't seek truth in philosophy books. He found it in people's eyes, their nervous smiles, their silent pauses. While others listened to speeches, Machiavelli listened to fear. He built power not through loud commands, but through quiet observation. As a diplomat navigating the volatile courts of Florence, he learned something most never do. People hide their weaknesses behind words, but they reveal everything in their gestures. And he took notes, obsessively. Historians later discovered Machiavelli kept a private notebook never intended for public eyes. After every political dinner negotiation or casual exchange, he wrote down what others missed, who avoided eye contact, who fidgeted when questioned, who grew defensive at the mention of status or failure. While others reacted to language, Machiavelli read between it. He wasn't interested in what people said. He wanted to know what they feared. He believed that every human being is governed by 2 or 3 core insecurities. Some fear irrelevance, others fear humiliation, abandonment, or poverty. But instead of judging these fears, Machiavelli classified them. He turned emotional vulnerability into a map, a system of psychological pressure points. The man who laughed too loudly, likely afraid of being ignored. The noble who couldn't stop boasting, terrified of inadequacy. Machiavelli didn't need to confront people to control them. He simply predicted how they'd behave under pressure. And this wasn't manipulation for cruelty. It was survival. In the ruthless world of Renaissance politics, understanding human weakness was a matter of life and death. Machiavelli realized that most people walk through life trying to hide their soft spots. But those soft spots direct every decision they make, every alliance, every betrayal, every moment of silence. He didn't guess behavior. He anticipated it with frightening precision. When he studied history, he wasn't searching for inspiration. He was mining power. He read biographies of emperors not to admire them, but to dissect them. He wanted to know what made Caesar hesitate, what made Alexander trust the wrong man, what personal fear led to a kingdom's collapse. He stripped away the romance of history and exposed its machinery, ambition, insecurity, manipulation, and fear over and over again. Machiavelli treated human nature as a battlefield, and every flaw he uncovered was another opening. While others clung to ideals, he looked straight into the dark and asked, what really moves people? Not virtue, not logic, but vulnerability. Imagine having that kind of insight. Walking into a room and instantly seeing who needs validation, who's hiding failure, who would betray someone just to be liked. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. And with it comes an unshakable advantage, the power to influence quietly, decisively, and permanently. Machiavelli's genius wasn't in manipulation itself. It was in understanding. He saw what others ignored, and he used it not to dominate blindly, but to move through a world where sincerity, could get you killed. He didn't wear a mask. He studied yours. And long before you realized what mattered to you, he already knew how to use it. Carl Jung and the Power of Inner Frequency. How Depth Rewrites Reality. Carl Jung didn't speak to your mind. He spoke to something deeper, something ancient. His words weren't designed to convince. They were meant to resonate. Where most thinkers tried to argue or explain, Jung tuned himself to a different frequency, one that bypassed logic and struck directly at the emotional core of a person's being. He believed that what truly influences people isn't what you say, but the depth from which you say it. Beneath language, beneath gestures, beneath all surface communication lies something far more powerful presence. Jung discovered that every human being transmits a kind of internal signal, a frequency shaped by past trauma, hidden desires, and emotional truths. Most people speak from the surface, reciting thoughts, opinions, and rehearsed lines. But some very few speak from a deeper layer. And when they do, time slows down, people stop blinking, and the conversation shifts into something raw and unforgettable. This is what happened in Jung's office again and again, not because of what he said, but because of where he was speaking from. He wrote extensively about this phenomenon. In his sessions with resistant patients, the skeptical, the withdrawn, the incurable, he didn't argue. He didn't try to prove anything. Instead, he quietly aligned himself with their emotional state. When someone was desperate, he reached into his own experience of despair and let it shape his tone, his gaze, his silence. When a patient was angry, he didn't suppress it. He met it not with control, but with recognition. Not imitation, resonance. To Jung, healing wasn't about fixing symptoms, it was about recontextualizing reality. He once treated a woman who believed she was insane. She saw strange symbols, heard inner voices, felt disconnected from the world. Other doctors labeled her schizophrenic. Jung saw something else, a woman standing at the threshold of an expanded consciousness. He didn't suppress her visions, he decoded them. He showed her that those symbols had appeared in mythology and art across cultures. That her mind wasn't broken, it was simply tuned to a deeper archetypal realm. By reframing her narrative, Jung transformed her identity. Madness became meaning. Symptoms became symbols. The voices a call to explore her inner world. That patient left his office not just healed, but reborn. She became an artist. The very things that once made her feel insane became the source of her deepest creative power. Jung's work proves something extraordinary. Reality isn't fixed, it's interpreted. And the stories we tell ourselves about our experiences determine whether we collapse or transform. He believed that the mind could be rewritten not with force, but with awareness. By changing the lens through which you view yourself, you change not only your thoughts, but your trajectory. Most people live trapped in stories they didn't choose. Jung offered a way out, not by escaping pain, but by mining it for insight. He saw suffering not as failure, but as a doorway. And in guiding others through that door, he revealed the deepest truth of all. The most powerful transformation doesn't happen to you, it happens within you. Marcus Aurelius and the discipline of disaster, training the mind for collapse. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth, yet began each morning by imagining everything he loved burning to the ground. Not out of pessimism, not from paranoia, but from preparation. While others prayed for peace, Marcus rehearsed catastrophe. In the quiet of his tent, before the clamor of war councils and Senate politics, he closed his eyes and visualized betrayal, invasion, humiliation, even death. To modern minds, this seems grim. But to Marcus, it was psychological strength training, because he knew the mind is like a muscle, and if you don't train it under pressure, it will shatter when life gets heavy. This ancient practice, later called premeditatio malorum, wasn't about fear, it was about freedom. When you've already faced loss in your mind, it can't paralyze you in real life. Marcus imagined his generals turning against him. He saw Rome invaded his name, disgraced everything he built, turned to dust. And then he asked himself one haunting question. If all this happens, who will I be? Because to Marcus, the worst thing wasn't suffering. The worst thing was becoming less than who you are because of it. His meditations written during military campaigns read like a manual for mental resilience. Not motivational fluff, not feel-good affirmations, but hard truths forged in hardship. He didn't ask the gods to protect him. He asked his mind to endure, because he understood what few ever do. You can't control the world, but you can train for its collapse. Think about it. Most people break not because something bad happens, but because they never imagined it could. They never prepared. When illness strikes, when love is lost, when failure comes, they panic, freeze, unravel. Marcus refused to let that happen. He walked into every day having already survived the worst in his mind in vivid detail. And that rehearsal gave him a calm others mistook for detachment. But it wasn't detachment, it was discipline. In a world that worships comfort, Marcus embraced suffering as a teacher. Not masochism, mastery. He didn't enjoy hardship, he weaponized it. He learned to make peace with uncertainty, to welcome adversity like a sparring partner to test his soul in simulated collapse. Because he knew the moment would come when real disaster would knock, when the world would bend, when others would panic. And in that moment, the man who had already died 1,000 mental deaths would be the only one left standing. That's not Stoicism as a philosophy. That's Stoicism as a survival system. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that strength isn't born in the gym or in public applause, it's born in solitude, in silence, in mental confrontation with the very things we fear most. He didn't meditate to escape reality, he meditated to sharpen his sword against it. And in doing so, he left us the ultimate blueprint for resilience. Don't wait for the storm, become the kind of mind that's already weathered it. The architecture of a powerful mind. Dancing with chaos, seeing without illusion. What do Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Machiavelli, Jung, and Marcus Aurelius all have in common? They lived in different eras, they believed in different truths, yet each of them reached the same hidden understanding that the most powerful mind isn't the most organized. It's the one that can dance with chaos and remain whole. These thinkers didn't seek to eliminate contradiction, they lived inside it. They didn't run from fear, they studied it. They didn't worship certainty, they destroyed it to see what remained. And in doing so, they became something rare in any age, psychologically untouchable. In a world that rewards performance and punishes depth, these men took the opposite path. Schopenhauer mastered the art of precise destruction, stripping falsehood from argument like flesh from bone. Nietzsche forged strength through paradox, proving that truth has many faces and the strongest mind can wear all of them. Machiavelli made human insecurity his blueprint, understanding people, not as they pretend to be, but as they truly are when no one's watching. Jung rewrote reality by decoding the symbolic messages buried in pain and madness. And Marcus Aurelius, he made peace with collapse before it ever came. He pre-lived disaster to rob it of its power. Each of them created what modern minds have forgotten: a multi-dimensional intellect. Not rigid, not reactive, but fluid, sharp, and grounded in emotional clarity. They weren't interested in appearing wise, they wanted to see clearly, think freely, and move silently through the illusions others got trapped inside. Their greatness wasn't in knowledge alone, it was in how they handled uncertainty, suffering, and contradiction. We live in a culture that teaches us to avoid discomfort, to fear failure, to cling to narratives that keep us safe, even if they aren't true. But these thinkers took the opposite approach. They leaned into discomfort. They asked better questions. They stayed longer in the fire. And because of that, their minds expanded into realms others never reach. They didn't just want to survive life, they wanted to decode it. What made them truly terrifying wasn't how much they knew, it was how deeply they understood the invisible architecture of power, emotion, and perception. They didn't just read books, they read people. They didn't chase comfort. They studied the psychology of collapse. And they didn't seek applause. They pursued clarity, even when it came at the cost of alienation. Their minds were forged at the intersection of philosophy and fire, of thought and torment. And that's the secret no one tells you to become truly strong. You must be willing to lose your innocence, your need to be right, your comfort in illusions, You must see yourself clearly. You must tear apart everything you were taught to believe and rebuild something more resilient, more real, more you. True power is not about control. It's not about domination. It's about presence, the kind that makes people quiet when you enter a room. Not because you demand respect, but because, like these thinkers, you've earned it by facing the inner chaos the world tries to hide and building a mind strong enough to hold it all without breaking. Life application. Build a mind that doesn't break. Under pressure. In a world obsessed with speed, comfort, and external validation, the most powerful thing you can do is train your mind to function clearly when everything around you falls apart. What Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Machiavelli, Jung, and Marcus Aurelius all discovered in their own way is this strength doesn't come from avoiding pain or chasing certainty. It comes from learning how to navigate fear, contradiction, and chaos without losing yourself. Each of these men developed mental practices we can apply today. Schopenhauer taught us to question everything, to dismantle weak logic instead of blindly accepting popular opinion. Nietzsche showed us that we don't have to cling to one identity or belief system. Instead, we should learn to hold multiple perspectives and grow stronger through inner conflict. Machiavelli reminded us that emotional intelligence isn't about being nice, it's about reading people's insecurities and navigating them with awareness, not naivety. Jung showed that healing isn't always fixing, sometimes it's reframing. You're not broken because you feel deeply or see the world differently. That sensitivity might be your superpower. And Marcus Aurelius proved that preparing your mind for the worst doesn't make you negative, it makes you resilient. In a culture that tells you to stay positive and manifest success, these thinkers offer a deeper truth. Real power is built in silence, under stress, in solitude. Train your mind like a warrior, not just to survive comfort, but to stand strong in uncertainty. Because when the world shakes, the ones who've rehearsed the storm will be the only ones left standing. This isn't philosophy. This is survival elevated.